And you can see my slides, okay? One of the RSCs can just give me a thumbs up.
I can see them.
Okay, great. Let me just get my Zoom screen situated here. Okay. Okay, I think we can
You
get started. Oh, go ahead.
you might want to turn off notifications on your Teams. Those are popping up.
Oh, okay. Yes, let me shut that up. All right. Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Marissa Robertson. I am the Deputy Director of the MVP program. And today we are going to be going over the upcoming FY27 round of the MVP Action Grant. So on our agenda today is just a brief overview of the MVP program, some details on the upcoming FY27 Action Grant round. The regional coordinators are going to be presenting case studies and transferable tools for you all. And then we are going to have a Q&A session at the end. Some things to note is that we are recording this session and it will be posted online on the MVP homepage once we have that link, and to please use the Q&A box for questions. So here is just a map of current statuses of the different MVP communities and the regions across the state. This information is online. You can find the regional coordinator information online in case you need to get in touch with them. So to start off, climate resilience is the ability of a community to address the needs of its built, social, and natural environment to anticipate, cope with, and rebound stronger from events and trends related to climate change hazards. Um, and what MVP really likes to emphasize is in our projects is that resilient communities don't just recover, they continuously build capacity to reduce the impacts of future climate events. So the MVP program has 10 core principles. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through each one in super detail here. We do have a document online that provides more explanation in detail on each of these core principles. There are just a few that I'd like to highlight for you all that are especially important in how we score our applications and that hold a heavier weight in our scoring of projects. The first one is the second core principle, increasing equitable outcomes for burdened areas and addressing the root causes of social vulnerability. You might notice some language updates in that core principle, which we are going to be covering in a little bit. Um, the second one that we'd like to highlight and really see in our projects is robust and meaningful community engagement. So hoping that projects go beyond typical engagement strategies such as like a newsletter or a flyer, really trying to get creative with how we engage with our communities. And we have a lot of resources around how to do this on the MVP website. And the third core principle that we like to see centered in our project is employing nature-based solutions. So now I'm going to pass it off to Kara, the MVP director, to talk about some of the upcoming changes to this round.
Awesome. Thanks, Marissa. Hi, everybody. Kara Renston, she, her pronouns. I'm the MVP program director. So one of the things that we wanted to highlight right off the bat is that we are excited to be piloting this new tool called Mass EnviroScreen through the Eco One Stop, which is what the MVP program will be a part of this round. We're going to be piloting it with our Environmental Justice and Equity Office. The decision to pilot this tool in the grant space was made only recently, so you haven't missed anything if you haven't heard about it yet. We haven't been referencing it in our expressions of interest feedback calls or anything like that. we are thrilled to have Saina from the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity here to talk more about the tool and start to socialize it with you all. But just as some more context, when we created the term priority populations a few years ago, it was because we were really lacking a way to discuss all the attributes that could make communities more vulnerable to climate impacts. There were lots of communities that didn't have EJ identified block groups, but did have folks that were more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change for a variety of reasons, including health and other types of reasons like that. So now this gap is being addressed through this new Mass EnviroScreen tool. It's being designed to identify areas that are experiencing overlapping environmental, climate, and social vulnerabilities. For this grant application, this round, references to EJ populations will be replaced with burdened areas, and that will reflect cumulative place-based conditions. The Mass EnviroScreen was initially developed by the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity in response to the 2024 Climate Act, which introduced new requirements to consider cumulative impacts in clean energy and siting and permitting decisions. The tool supports these analyses by providing a consistent framework for understanding how multiple stressors intersect in specific places. By applying the same lens within the grant process, Massachusetts aims to better align program design and decision-making with its EJ commitments and ensure that resources and benefits are responsive to communities facing the highest cumulative burdens. So again, we're going to pilot it this round through Eco One Stop, and we really look forward to your feedback on how it works with the grants space. And just to reiterate, the Mass EnviroScreen will be utilized in the same way that the EJ map was to identify if projects are located in and benefiting burdened and vulnerable communities. So now I'm going to pass it over to Saina to introduce herself and give us an overview of the tool.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Kara, for the introduction. My name is Saina Mashmasarmi, and I'm an environmental justice liaison within the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity. And as Kara mentioned, I'll be giving an overview of the Mass EnviroScreen tool that has been developed by the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity within EEA. So at a high level, the tool has been designed. It is a GIS mapping tool that can identify communities with the greatest environmental burdens and social vulnerabilities within the Massachusetts and provide a consistent and is intended to provide a consistent, transparent baseline that is available to the public. We also hope that the tool can be leveraged by communities to better understand local conditions quantitatively, support advocacy and community organizing, and ultimately strengthen grant applications within the space. Next slide. And so just to explain some of the methodology which informs the tool, the Mass EnviroScreen uses 30 indicators, which can fall into 5 components or categories, which include environmental exposure, environmental effects, climate risk, sensitive populations, and socioeconomic factors. The first 3 categories are intended to capture the types of environmental burdens that communities experience. And so environmental exposures indicators are based on measurements of different types of pollution that people may come into contact with. This includes indicators such as rates of air pollutants, like fine particulate matter, and ozone. The environmental effects indicators are based on the locations of toxic chemicals in or near communities that can cause adverse environmental conditions. These indicators include things like proximity to hazardous waste sites or impaired water bodies. And the last category, which falls into environmental burdens, are climate risk indicators, which speaks to a community's level of exposures to climate hazards. And this category includes indicators like flood risk and extreme heat. The last 2 bullets on the slide or components are considered to be population characteristics and describe conditions that can make people or communities more vulnerable to the burdens mentioned above. And sensitive population indicators measure the prevalence of physiological or health conditions in a community and capture health factors such as rates of pediatric asthma and premature mortality. Socioeconomic factors indicators are conditions that may increase people's stress or make healthy living difficult and decrease capacity to adapt. And so within that category, we consider indicators such as linguistic isolation, rates of poverty, and unemployment. And you'll notice that these components and the indicators within the categories are intentionally oriented towards communities and health and the overall health and well-being of a community. And this people-centered focus is intended to reflect one of the core purposes of environmental justice and ensure that cumulative impacts on communities are considered alongside other types of environmental protection and analysis. Um, and provide a more comprehensive picture of cumulative impact within Massachusetts. Next slide, please. And so for each of the 30 indicators, the algorithm behind the Mass EnviroScreen tool will calculate a percentile rank across all census block groups statewide. And then we average those percentile ranks within each category so that we can get an average score for environmental exposures, one for environmental effects, and so on. And then those component scores are grouped into the two main categories I mentioned, which is pollution and climate burden, and then population characteristics. And to generate the final cumulative burden score, we multiply the burden score by the population characteristic score. And the product is a raw score that is intended to reflect the interaction of these two buckets of characteristics. And once that product is determined, the percentile for that census block group is calculated so that the final score will indicate the percentage of scores in a group that are equal to or given or higher than a given score. So, for example, if a community receives a Mass EnviroScreen score of 75 or higher, that means that that particular community experiences cumulative burdens equal to or greater than 75% of all block groups within the state. Next slide. And so the result of this process and model is that on the Mass EnviroScreen mapping tool, higher scores will indicate a greater combined environmental and social vulnerability for that community. And to be considered a burdened area under the Mass EnviroScreen score, communities must meet one or both of the following criteria, which is a Mass EnviroScreen score of 75 or greater, or the census block group has an annual median household income of 65% or less of the statewide annual median household income. It is important to note that on the tool, all communities will have their Mass EnviroScreen scores displayed, and that a community not identified as a burdened area may still have elevated percentile values for individual indicators within that community. And in these cases, applicants are encouraged to review the Mass EnviroScreens at the indicator level to better understand localized conditions and use that information to explain how their project is benefiting those more vulnerable populations that the tool has identified. And so within the Mass EnviroScreens tool, as I will show on later slides, you are able to review all the indicator values and determine and see which are elevated within that community. Next slide. And so on this slide, you will see a screenshot of the Mass EnviroScreen and the map of burdened areas within the Commonwealth. On the right side of the screen, you will see a text box which appears when you first access the application. And it's important to note that on this text box which appears is the technical documentation, which gives a summary and explains in a little more detail the methodology behind the tool, but also what each indicator means and the data source for each indicator that was used in the tool, as well as some other contextual information, which may be helpful as you use the tool. And next slide, please. And we wanted to show a few examples of what the tool looks like when you select a specific census block group on the tool. And so in this example, we selected a census block within the city of Pittsfield. And you'll notice that this census block group that we selected is a burden area on the tool, but not due to the percentile score, but rather due to that second criterion, which is the median household income falls below the 65th percentile for the state. And so when you select the tool, a table which shows all the indicators for the tool that inform the tool will appear, and the raw value of each indicator as well as the percentile for each indicator will appear on the table. And on the t in the table, they are separated by their categories. And so in this example, we pulled up the socioeconomic factors, indicators, and so you will be able to see the percentage, for example, the percentage of adults without a high school diploma in its raw form, but also the percentile will be directly underneath that. And so you see in this example that the percentile for percentage of adults without a high school diploma is elevated. So is the percentage of households below the poverty level. That is also an elevated indicator. And so you would be able to point to these indicators within your grant application. Next slide, please. We also wanted to give an example of a town that is not, or a census block group that is not considered a burden area, and how you could use the indicator or still use the indicators within your grant application. And so we went or selected a census block group in Provincetown, which is not a burden area, but you'll see on the right-hand side that for their sensitive population indicators, there are still elevated indicators within the census block group. And so in this case, you'll see that their rates for premature mortality are elevated. They are at the 83rd percentile, and the prevalence of cancer accrued within the census block group is also elevated, is at the 95th percentile, almost the 96th percentile. And so you would also be able to point to these indicators within your grant application if it applies to your particular application. Next slide. And so that completes my portion, just to giving an overview of the mass and virus screen. But as you review the application, if there are any questions or concerns, or as Kara mentioned, any feedback on the tool that you wish to share, you can contact the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity at ej.inquiries@mass.gov. And if you have any questions today, I believe we will be answering questions at the end of today's session, and so I will be available to answer questions then. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Saina. Yes, Saina is going to be staying on through the end of our session for the Q&A. So if there are any relevant mass and viral screen questions that come up, she will be here. It's a very exciting tool. It brings together a lot of information. So it's an exciting time to be trying this out. Great. I did want to mention that I noticed for some reason that the raise hand function seems to be available for some folks. We're not going to be using that today for questions. Please just put your questions in the chat, and we will go through them at the end in the Q&A session. So here we just want to go over some statistics from our last action grant round, FY26. So we had 158 applications come in, which is quite a lot. We had 109.6 million requested for projects, and we were able to fund 54 of those, which is about a third of all the projects applied for. We had a total funding pool of 28.5 million, and the average grant size was 527,900. So one change you might have heard about is that this year's action grant application is going to be part of the new Environment and Climate One Stop application. So the Eco One Stop is a process in which several different environmental grant programs are coming together to use one common application through one streamlined process. So we are going to be covering the Eco One Stop application and all of the application details and components in a separate set of webinars. So we will not be going over the action grant application details during this webinar. That will be now in the Eco One Stop webinar. We have two webinars coming up. The first is going to be Tuesday, January 27th, and then another one Wednesday, January 28th. These will cover the exact same content, so please only attend one. You don't have to attend both of them. It's going to cover the one-stop process. It will cover the participating grant programs and how the combined application is going to work, and then there will be a Q&A. We will also be offering a webinar on the new EEA grants management system. This is the platform that the Eco One Stop application is going to be hosted through, in which you will be applying through. So because this is also a new system, we are going to be holding a webinar that focuses just on how to use the GMS. It will cover how to create a new account, how to navigate this GMS platform and find the application that you are looking for to apply, and how to access and submit the Eco One Stop application in particular. And we know that some of you may have already used the GMS to apply to some other EEA programs. It's been in use for a little bit now, but this will be the first time we'll be doing the Eco One Stop, and it will also be through this new GMS platform. So we want to make sure we have all the details covered for you. And as always, you can register for these webinars on the MVP website. So just some higher level details on the upcoming FY27 round for the MVP Action Grant. We have a cap for individual projects, which is 3 million, and 5 million for regional projects. There are some slight changes to match requirements this year. So it is 10% match required, except for tribal governments and designated rural and small towns, which have no match requirement. And these are rural and small towns that have been designated by the Office of Rural Affairs, which you can find that list on their website and will be linked in our application as well. Something to note about the 10% match this year is that it will now be 10% match of the refunded requested grant funding, not 10% of the total project cost, which I know we've had that change requested in the past. As always, our projects are going to be reimbursement based. And MVP funds both 1 and 2-year projects. We do want to note that sometimes we have to scope down 2-year projects to 1 year, depending on a number of factors, including available funding, the project details, the project timing, etc. Here you will see who is eligible for MVP. This will also be available to you. This information will be available to you in the Eco One Stop RFR application as well. But municipalities who have received MVP community designation are eligible. This would either be by completing 1.0 or have completed or are participating in the 2.0 grant. And then it is also open to the Commonwealth subdivisions, so cities, towns, counties, and districts, authorities, commissions, or boards. And then also tribal governments are eligible for MVP. Next up, we just want to cover some of our project types that you can apply for. As always, regardless of the project type, we are looking for projects that align with our MVP core principles. So the first project type is type 1, which is planning, assessment, capacity building, and regulatory updates. So this might look like identifying and assessing people, resources, or infrastructure that might be impacted by climate change to develop a resilience strategy, assessing feasibility of a specific climate adaptation strategy, developing or adopting planning documents and regulations that can encourage climate change adaptation in your community, or capacity building projects that do things like increase social resiliency, such as forming a community liaison program or an education campaign around climate resilience. The next project type is type 2, which is design and permitting. This is a little bit more straightforward, I would say, than type 1. So this would be creating design plans for site preparation, installation, and project monitoring and maintenance, and preparing and filing federal, state, local, and utility permit applications for proposed activities. For that second bullet point, please note that we don't fund permitting strategies. So this would be researching and listing required permits. Any permit related tasks that are proposed need to be action oriented, such as actually preparing the permit application. And then type 3 is construction and on the ground implementation. And an important thing to note for this project type is that we need you to demonstrate all necessary permits and permissions have been secured in order for the project to get funded. So this might look like preparing the project site for constructing or installing adaptation options or developing and implementing appropriate monitoring protocols, installing or implementing energy resilience projects, land acquisitions to achieve climate resilience goals, or implementing other on-the-ground adaptation projects like tree planting. And then here is just a list of action grant projects that are not MVP competitive. So this would include climate action plans, and this is because we now have the MVP 2.0 process, which is very similar. Fossil fuel generators, tree removal with exceptions, FEMA hazard mitigation plans, projects that don't incorporate future climate change projections or planning are not competitive, or projects that seek to repair to previous conditions. And now I'm going to pass it over to our regional coordinators. They are going to go over some of their favorite project examples and also a transferable tool that which is like a deliverable that we have gotten from funding the project. And I want to note that all of these deliverables are now available in our new Resilient Mass deliverables database. You can go in and sort and filter and search for all different items in there. And so we put all of these deliverables in there for you to access. So first up is Courtney Rocha. She's our Southeast Regional Coordinator.
Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm here to talk about the Martha's Vineyard Public Food Forest Plan. We awarded $96,000 to the Martha's Vineyard Commission in 2024. And although they're not a municipality, this RPA falls under the political subdivisions of the Commonwealth, so they are an eligible applicant. And what this project did was identify where and how public perennial food forest production spaces could be implemented across all 6 towns on the vineyard. And they conducted an island-wide assessment and provided recommendations where these food forests could be implemented, with the goal of maximizing community access and also benefit. And then from there, they created a food forest implementation guide and toolkit for each of the towns to use should they want to implement a food forest. And then throughout this process, they worked with both the community and tribal members in Aquinnah to design a detailed site design for a community food forest. So one step further. And that's it. If you have any questions about this project, please reach out. Oh, and slide 2. And here is the detailed site design of the food forest. And they also have so many native plants. They have a toolkit also for native plants to be implemented in this area, which I've also passed out across the region because it's just really comprehensive and accessible.
Awesome, thank you. And yes, the whole food forest plan is available in the database for you to look at. Next up is Michelle Rowden, our Northeast Regional Coordinator.
Hello, I'm going to talk about the project in Reading, the Mallet, Soames and Morgan constructed wetland site. The town took an underused site and created a significant constructed wetland system that collects and treats stormwater from the area. And treats it before it reaches the Aberjona River. The Aberjona River has its headwaters in Reading, so another reason why it was really critical to critical regionally to do this project. The benefits will be obviously local and also regional by attenuating those flows to the river to the benefit of downstream communities. The uh, design incorporated climate data, and so they scaled the wetlands appropriately given future extreme rainfall events. This was born out of a regional watershed scale assessment through Mystic River Watershed Association and the Resilient Mystic Collaborative, proving that partnerships and regional collaboration can be really beneficial for projects and for maybe smaller cities and towns that lack capacity to take on large projects. Um, the site also has a trail system that runs through this property. It did before, it was not really safe or accessible. And so that was improved and made more accessible. They also included educational signage, benches, and they removed, excuse me, invasive species and planted native species. The town was really proactive and it maintained communication with the public, especially the immediate abutters who had numerous questions and concerns throughout the entire process and even during construction. They were really responsive and took a lot of time to go out and meet with folks to answer questions and explain the project. You can go to the next slide. The project website is still active and provides great transparency about the whole project, including photos of the site before and after the construction, the plans, the permits, and the outreach materials. So that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. Up next, we have Carolyn Norkowitz. She's our Greater Boston Regional Coordinator.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. Carolyn Norkowitz, she, her, Greater Boston. I am going to speak about the City of Medford's ongoing project called Medford Connects. So we've been funding this project for about 4 or 5 years now in different phases through multiple grants, through different grant rounds. Medford Connects is a social resilience initiative that improves access for priority populations to information, resources, relationships, and community spaces in the city of Medford. A team of community liaisons and capital C connectors collaborate on communications, hosting community events, and working with individual residents to access these critical resources. Each community liaison focuses on a specific language group, and each connector focuses on a different resilience theme, such as food systems and financial security, and many others. So what made this project particularly competitive over the last several years is clearly its strong focus on centering equity and community partnerships. It builds ongoing community capacity for climate resilience among city staff, community-based organizations, and residents. By having these teams of liaisons and connectors, they're really able to support city staff in all areas of their work in terms of, again, increasing access for residents. And it really seeks to address the root causes of social and ultimately climate vulnerability. Next slide, please. So these guides are available on the Resilient Mass Resource Database, as Marissa said. They're featured as a transferable tool as well, or maybe they are. I forget if we've updated it or not, but they're on the Resilient Mass Resource Database. They offer really valuable lessons and insights into running a successful community liaison program, which, if you're familiar with our MVP 2.0 process, that's the cornerstone of that planning work, and we welcome it in action grants as well. It highlights community liaison activities throughout the Medford community, as well as a series of cultural celebrations that were hosted by the different connectors. And they do a really nice job of explaining the relationship between climate change and these resilience themes. So you might wonder, what is financial security? Making sure folks have financial security. What does that have to do with climate resilience? So they really draw those connections and really, I think, help folks who are new to the world of social resilience gain a better understanding. So I encourage you all to check out those resources.
Awesome. Thanks, Carolyn. Up next, we have our Central Regional Coordinator, Hillary King.
Hi, everybody. Hillary King, Central Regional Coordinator, she, her pronouns. Thanks for being here. This slide is talking about Harvard. They have a very active town committee doing a lot of great community engagement and outreach to support the town's 2021 climate resolution and push forward the priorities of their 2022 climate action plan. So this modest grant request provided some technical funding to support creation of an open space residential bylaw, update the town wetlands bylaw, and have a conversation throughout the community about tree preservation. Funding also supported some great outreach and engagement during the grant period. Some of what made this application really competitive were that it centers on nature-based solutions, supporting wetlands, open space, and forest while still addressing housing needs. It included tasks to help center youth voices and engage with different folks across town. And there was lots of support from volunteer leadership to implement the community's priorities. On the next slide, Marissa, these images are from the town's open space conservation planned residential development bylaw final report, which is available on the Resilient Mass Resource Database. It includes case studies, metrics, overview and rationale of changes, and a simplified language handout for town meeting. I've also provided some links to some of their engagement events if folks are interested to check them out or to share.
Awesome. Thanks, Hillary. And yes, the slides will be posted online after this as well. So any links that are in here, you will be able to get to those through the slides. Up next, we have Andrew Smith, our Greater Connecticut River Valley Regional Coordinator.
Hello, folks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Holyoke's community cookbook project. So this was awarded back in FY24. It was a 2-year project under $150,000. And what's exciting about this one is it looks at the connection between community, local agriculture, local food, and just the way food and food independence can start to build connections between people. What they did is essentially they looked at, I think if we go to the next slide, what they did is they looked at some really cool things. There's these great community gardens in Holyoke that have been there forever. Well, maybe forever is a little bit of a stretch, for at least 40 years. And then they began to kind of get descriptions of the community gardens, work with people who are connected to community gardens. They did an outreach to people for recipes from the community. They did outreach to people to get stories from people about why food matters to them. They developed these basically podcasts and YouTube series to have like local celebrities like Holyoke's mayor kind of talking about how food matters to them. And then they assembled it all in a cookbook that together is one is in English and one is in Spanish. And the name is Slancha y Sabor, and that one is fascinating because it kind of calls attention to the fact that Holyoke is a community that comes from really it's representative of 2 different island populations, one in the North Atlantic from Ireland and one in the Caribbean from Puerto Rico. And I think the fact that they were deliberately focusing on how these 2 cultures have helped shape what Holyoke is today and using food as a thread to tie it all together was really fascinating. And what makes it related to climate is you have land use, you have local decisions for local food, different ways that people can connect to supporting local food consumption within their own communities and preserving open space for people to rest, recreate, and connect to nature in a way that's like fun. And I think sometimes that's a big part of climate work is just connecting with people, building trust, and making it fun and engaging. So this is a cool, exciting project with lots of partners, so many partners throughout the community, and it's really just excellent. So big shout out to Stephanie from Holyoke for excellent project.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Yes, very cool project with a very fun deliverable. Up next, we have Emily Murad, who is working as our temporary Berkshires and Hilltowns RC, as Emma Sass is out on leave.
Everyone. Yes, I am Emily Murad, representing the Berkshires and Hilltowns region today. And the project I'm going to be talking about was in Ashfield, where they were focusing on culture and rural climate resilience. So the goal of this project was really to create opportunities for conversations on a few specific topics they wanted to focus on. That was clean energy, nature-based resilient solutions, and affordable housing. And then ultimately to be able to set the stage to have more collaboration in the future and to increase their resilience overall as a rural community. So the town partnered with a few different organizations, with a local theater, with an Indigenous cultural center. They also had high school aged student liaisons participate in interviewing different community members. A couple of their engagement events were site tours. They had one tour of prospective locations for municipal clean energy locations. They also had a site tour that focused more on affordable and sustainable housing, and a really robust community resilience day where there were people came together. There was food and events like music and dancing and just kind of a fun community day, which also had conversations around these topics that they wanted to focus on. Some of the things that made this project competitive were that it centered nature-based solutions. They did lots of engagement with vulnerable populations. Even though they did not have a mapped environmental justice block group or what in future rounds would be a burdened area, they still focused on reaching out to folks in their community who they knew might be more vulnerable. And they also had a lot of volunteers who were able to really make sure that these ideas were community, came from the community and were implemented that way. If you go on to the next slide, their deliverable was a really comprehensive project summary document. So some things that made this deliverable stand out, there was lots of photos and input from various community members. They had great descriptions of all their community engagement events, and a section about their key findings and next steps. So how they plan to continue their momentum moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Great. And so just want to call out that these projects and the rest of the projects that MVP has funded, both planning and action grants, are available to investigate and look at in our EEA Climate Grant Viewer, where you can filter, sort by different keywords. It's a really great resource. And then just some quick general program updates. So we are going to be having the MVP Winter Webinar Series this year. Dates and topics should be coming very soon, so be on the lookout for those. We will send out a newsletter update when those are available. The Climate Resilience Playbook, which was developed in partnership with MAPC and PVPC, is now up online. With applications coming up, it's a great time to look at that new resource if you haven't done so yet. We have a brand new Resilient Mass homepage, which consolidates grant and program resources, makes it easier to find announcements and time-sensitive information. And it also has a number of new resources available on there for you to look at as well. So please check that out if you haven't already. And then just that we are getting ready to hopefully announce soon the next round of 2.0 awarded communities. And as always, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to your regional coordinator, to the mvp.ms.gov email. And again, please just note that Emma Sass, the Berkshires and Hilltowns regional coordinator, is on leave. So our MVP fellow, Emily Murad, is the one that would be assisting you during that time. Great. So I think now we are able to get into our Q&A.
Great. Lots of stuff going on in the chat. If you're in the Q&A window, if you click on the answered questions, I think folks can do that from the webinar. We've provided a lot of answers in there that we won't be asking, I think, again through the through this session. But I'm going to start with some high-level questions about the grant, and then there's a lot of questions about the Enviro screen, so we'll hop into that next. What is the total funding amount for this year? Folks are wondering.
It will
Go
be
ahead.
similar to last year. I think if you look in the capital investment plan for the Commonwealth, it always has the MVP numbers in it, and I think it's around 25-ish million, but don't quote me on that.
Perfect. Thanks, Kara. And then Marissa, for a 2-year project, would the $3 million cap be the same, or is that a yearly cap?
I
Do you
believe it
know?
is for the whole project, but Kara, can you confirm that that's correct?
That's correct.
Yes, so it'd be 3 million over 2 years.
Great. And we'll direct it back to Kara. There's some questions about 2.0 and eligibility. Are there updates on when the 2019 plans will need to apply for 2.0?
Yeah, good question. We will be figuring that out and sending people out notifications over the next few months if you'll need to apply in the fall. I think at this point we've gotten through all of 2018, so it would be like the first few months of 2019, I think that would need to be in the next round. But you will hear from us prior to needing to apply, so don't worry about that.
Right. And so anybody who hasn't already been requested to apply for 2.0 is still eligible under their 1.0 plan for this round of grants. Yeah.
That is correct. Yep.
All right. Perfect. And I guess there's another question here. If a town or city received a construction grant within the last few years, would they still be eligible for another action grant? And I believe the answer to that is yes.
Yep.
Yes, we don't put limits on if you received a construction grant previously, you can't receive another type 3 construction grant.
Great. All right. So let's see, Anna, if you're available too. We've got a bunch of questions on the Enviro screen. This one person wanted to know, how was the environmental exposure determined, and will funding be available to track environmental exposure?
Thank you for the question. So the environmental exposure component is determined by combining several different indicators that reflect pollution sources and environmental conditions. And so there are 8 indicators which inform the score for the environmental exposure component, which include fine particulate matter, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, diesel particulate matter, drinking water noncompliance, air toxics cancer risk, the air toxics respiratory hazard index, and proximity to heavy traffic. And those indicators are explained in more detail in the technical documentation, which is available on the Massive Virus Screen tool.
Great, thanks. And so I guess related to that, there were some questions about lake resources and phosphorus and elevated E. coli, and if that's all taken into account as part of the drinking water or other exposure qualifications?
Yes. So the mass screen does not include excess phosphorus or cyanobacterial blooms as standalone indicators, but these risks are captured through the impaired water bodies indicator, which falls under the environmental effects component category within the tool. And so we use the Mass DEP's integrated list of waters as a data source, and that list identifies lakes, rivers, and other surface waters that do not meet water quality standards.
Great. Another person wanted to know if the Enviro tool includes the age of infrastructure. So they said that historic communities have old everything, all of which financially constrains governments, knowing that critical infrastructure needs to be replaced.
So the tool currently does not include the age of infrastructure as an indicator.
Okay. There was some concern in the Q&A that the tool would diminish the ranking of rural projects, looking for, you know, equity across the state in terms of funding. East and west, I think, has been a challenge in the past. So wondering how this takes into account rural vulnerable communities.
Mhm. So EEA recognizes this concern and is committed to ensuring that rural and less densely populated communities remain competitive for funding. Mass Screen is intended to be a screening tool, but not the sole determinant of funding decisions, and it will be used alongside other application criteria that account for local context, project benefits, and program-specific goals.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just want to add one thing to that in terms of how it relates to what MVP looks for in the MVP application. I'm getting blinded by the sun right now. Um, but historically, MVP has funded a pretty good number of projects from areas that didn't have in the past what would be an EJ area, or now might not be a burdened area, but there's still plenty of communities and folks in the community that might be vulnerable to climate for a number of reasons. So please don't just write it off as, oh, we don't meet the burdened area. Designation, please look at who is in your community and the data available, and you will see that even if you're not meeting this specific thing, there's still plenty to go off of probably in your community for your application.
Great. Thanks, Marissa. And I think one more here, thinking about the inputs to the Enviro screen. One person was wondering how the tool handles incarcerated populations in census blocks that contain MCI facilities.
Yeah, that is a great question. I will have to connect with my team on that one and get back to you all with a response.
Perfect. Um, and then some questions on how to use the tool with MVP. So Kara, maybe for you, first, someone wanted to know if there'll be training on the Enviro Screen tool.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We've talked about that briefly, but we will take that back and figure out if we can provide some additional opportunities. I will say that Saina will again graciously be presenting on this at our official Eco One Stop webinars that will happen after the application is released at the end of January. So there will be, more time to talk about all of this and learn about the tool. But yeah, we'll see if we can set up some office hours or additional training as well.
Okay, great. Is there a way to export the table of information on the tool?
There's
Begin training.
there's currently not a way to export the table of information. However, we do plan to add that data report functionality in the near future to improve transparency and usability.
Okay. And then back to Kara, for regional projects, how should we use the EnviroScreen tool? Pick one or two places, or is there a way to aggregate info for a given region through the tool?
Yeah, so I can at least take the first part of that question. So yeah, for regional projects, I mean, in general, we're using this tool exactly the same way that we use the EJ map and the priority populations map. So anything you would have normally done, you're just replacing with this tool. And so for regional projects, I would say, look at the region, see if there are burdened areas within the region, and obviously try to craft your project to benefit those areas as well as involve those communities in those areas. But also look at the indicators in the areas that may not meet the burdened area. You might see that there's a high level of low income folks or a high level of health risk. And you should think about how to craft your project to respond to those issues and involve those populations.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it maybe answers the next question as to whether the EnviroScreen is required for the application, or wondering if they could use previously made studies. So it
Yeah,
sounds like,
exactly. So there will be specific questions about the EnviroScreen. You should be using the data in the EnviroScreen. Obviously, if you have other data available, it's fine to reference as well. But we are looking for specifically folks to use this tool.
all right, great. I'm going to slide down to another category of questioning. Thank you, Smayana and Kara, for answering all our EnviroScreen questions. Some questions about project types. One, wondering if a project can be a hybrid or blended request with a shovel-ready project, a design and permitting component, and regulatory updates. So combining that planning type versus design and permitting type versus construction or implementation type.
Yeah, good question. Typically, generally, we try not to fund projects that combine multiple phases, so like a type 2 and a type 3 into one project, but really it can depend on the scope. Any kind of implementation project that requires extensive permitting would have to demonstrate that the permits are in hand and ready. So probably wouldn't want to, for timing purposes, try to do that permitting process and the implementation all in 1 2 year project. But if it's something that might not require permitting, there is potential there, but it's kind of context dependent on the project.
Thank you. There's a question here about solar projects. They wanted to know how much information in hand cities need to apply for one of those. And maybe if Andrew's available, we can direct that one to him.
Hello. Hey. So I would say they should have if you require an interconnection service agreement, you should have it in hand when applying for the project. And that's the main thing. I think feasibility studies that are just kind of looking at the building, like how much solar could you put here? Those traditionally haven't scored very well. But things that are concrete and tangible related to implementation of installation of a system would be more competitive.
Thank you. And then there's a couple more project specific questions. So if we haven't answered something that's kind of specific to your community, and you can reach out to your regional coordinator to answer more of those directed questions, probably in the next week or so.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's kind of why we're having it now before the application is out, so you can kind of marinate on some of these ideas and think through your questions and reach out to your regional coordinator. Yeah, within the next couple weeks to talk more, because once the application opens, we can not answer any project specific related questions.
Great. It looks like we're coming up on time. There's a couple other shorter questions, but maybe we can reach back out for those.
Yeah, I see this question, Hillary, of the difference between 1.0 and 2.0. I was thinking maybe we could just cover that one quickly as our last question,
All right.
if it wasn't answered in the chat. So the 1.0 process was the original MVP planning process. This is something that pretty much all of the communities in Massachusetts have already completed that process or are in the home stretch of finishing it up. And communities are no longer able to apply for the 1.0 process. The 2.0 process is our new updated planning process that builds off of 1.0, and is the process that we're now requiring communities to go through, because the 1.0 process seems to be aging out a little bit, and communities had wanted a way to be able to re-engage and update their resilience priorities. So this new 2.0 planning process is the update to what was originally done through the 1.0 process.
Great.
Awesome. So I think that's it. We will post the slides and the recording online for you when it is ready. And as always, send out notifications of important announcements. And we thank you all for attending today.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.